Rain drizzled outside the glass windows of Serenity Spa, the soft golden lights reflecting off the marble walls, creating a tranquil space that stood in stark contrast to Dominic West's chaotic mind. He sat in a leather armchair, his expensive gray suit unable to hide his exhaustion. Dominic, CEO of Westcorp, a name that commanded fear across the business world, was now just a worn-out man, fleeing from the sensational headlines about his company's internal scandal. But more than anything, he was running from himself 3 months of sleepless nights, when sleep had become nothing but a distant luxury. Sedatives, therapy, alcohol, none of it worked. He came here, to this lavish spa, clinging to a fragile hope that it might save him from his chronic insomnia. While waiting for his treatment, Dominic absently watched the rain fall, his eyelids heavy. Then a soft singing voice drifted from the room next door, gentle like a lullaby, no lyrics, no song, just an improvised melody. The woman's voice was slightly husky, imperfect, but it carried a strange pull, as if it touched something deep inside him. Dominic closed his eyes, not deliberately, and for the first time in months, he let go. His mind went blank. He fell asleep, a short but profound sleep that lasted 20 minutes more precious than any $1 million contract he'd ever signed. When he woke, Dominic was stunned. His heart raced, not with anxiety but with an unfamiliar sensation. Who had been singing? He needed to know. No, he had to know. The next morning, Dominic returned to the spa, ignoring his packed schedule and the flurry of calls from his assistant. He stood at the reception desk, demanding to see the girl who was singing yesterday, in a voice that allowed no refusal. The receptionist looked flustered, but eventually a young woman emerged from the hallway. She wore a pristine white spa uniform, her brown hair tied up, with a few strands falling across her forehead. Her hands, slick with massage oil, were being hastily wiped clean with a towel. The name tag read, Ruby. Dominic looked at her, and for a moment he felt as though he'd been pulled into another world. She wasn't beautiful in the glamorous way of the women he was used to, no makeup, no sparkle, but her sharp brown eyes seemed to see right through him, making him feel exposed. "Were you the one singing yesterday?" Dominic asked, his voice low but firm. Ruby raised an eyebrow, tilted her head, a faint wry smile crossing her lips. "Singing? Maybe. I hum sometimes when I clean the rooms. Is there a problem?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He studied her, the way she stood tall, the way she wiped her hands with unbothered composure, and the way her gaze held no trace of fear. Something about her made it impossible for him to look away. He got straight to the point, his tone cold but absolutely confident. $1 million. One night. No touching. I just need you to stay with me so I can sleep, like last night. Silence. Ruby stopped wiping her hands, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she were assessing whether he was serious. Then she laughed, a short, derisive laugh that was enough to make Dominic, who was used to silencing entire boardrooms, feel as if he'd just been struck. "I'm a spa employee, not a sleep machine," she said, her voice calm but razor sharp. "And my presence isn't for sale." Dominic was stunned. For the first time in his life, he'd been refused not out of fear or hesitation, but with a clear, confident finality. He opened his mouth almost by instinct. $2 million. Ruby paused mid-step, turned back to look at him. She didn't say anything, simply studied him. In her eyes, there was no greed, none of the wavering he had expected. Instead, there was a flicker of curiosity mingled with caution. "Listen, Mr. West," she said, deliberately emphasizing his name, as if to remind him she knew exactly who he was. "Your money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy me. If you can't sleep, try chamomile tea. It's a lot cheaper." She turned her back on him, leaving Dominic standing there, his mind spinning. He wasn't angry. He couldn't be. Instead, an odd sensation rose in him, a fierce, almost obsessive curiosity. Ruby hadn't just rejected his money. She'd rejected his entire world, the world where everything had a price. And she'd done it with a faint smile, a fearless gaze, as if he, Dominic West, the most powerful man in the city, was nothing special at all. He watched her disappear down the hallway, and for the first time, he felt a spark ignite in his exhausted mind. Ruby was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She couldn't be swayed by money, couldn't be intimidated by power, and more importantly, she made him want to understand her, not to possess, but to discover. She was a puzzle, a challenge, and Dominic West had never known how to walk away from a challenge. Meanwhile, Ruby returned to the staff lounge, her hand clenched tightly around the towel. She told herself she had to forget that strange man, but his eyes, not just arrogant, but carrying a deep, quiet loneliness, kept circling in her thoughts. She shook her head, murmuring to herself, "Don't be foolish, Ruby." But deep down, she knew this encounter had already changed something, though she couldn't yet name what it was. Dominic stood there for a few more seconds, the corner of his mouth curving slightly. He had no intention of giving up, not out of pride, but because Ruby had unknowingly awakened a part of him, a part he thought had died long ago. She was the first person who had made him feel alive. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Serenity Spa still carried its familiar peaceful air, but to Dominic West, it had become an irresistible destination. He returned this time with a more legitimate excuse, a massage appointment, but deep down, he knew he hadn't come just to relax. Ruby's soft singing, her piercing gaze, and her blunt refusal had etched themselves into his mind like a melody he couldn't forget. Dominic wouldn't admit it. He wasn't the type to admit anything easily, but her presence calmed him, a rare feeling in his chaotic world. Ruby recognized him the moment he walked in. She was arranging towels in the corner, but her eyes flicked briefly toward Dominic, who stood at the reception desk with his usual confident air. He wore a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. She reminded herself to keep her distance. This man wasn't just wealthy and powerful, he was dangerous. Not because of what he could do, but because of the way he looked at her. Too long, too deep, as if he were trying to read every thought in her head. Dominic requested that Ruby be his massage therapist, despite her schedule already being full. The spa manager, unwilling to displease such a VIP client, agreed to rearrange appointments. Ruby sighed but didn't protest. She knew he hadn't come here only for a massage, and part of her was curious to see what he would do next. In the treatment room, the soft candlelight mingled with the scent of lavender. Dominic lay on the massage table, his body relaxed, but his mind was completely focused on Ruby. She worked with practiced professionalism, her hands firm but skillful as they moved over his shoulders and back. The space was quiet, filled only with the sound of instrumental music and their steady breathing. Dominic closed his eyes not to unwind, but to feel every movement of her hands. He didn't say a word, but each time her fingers touched his skin, he felt a current run through him, subtle, but strong enough to make him open his eyes to look at her. Ruby felt his gaze. She tried to focus on her work, but Dominic's presence made the room feel stifling. He wasn't like other clients. He didn't make polite small talk or pretend to be friendly. He simply watched, and that look made her uneasy, though it also stirred a curiosity she didn't want to acknowledge. The massage ended. Dominic sat up, his black hair slightly tousled. Ruby stepped over to pick up his shirt, intending to help him put it back on as part of the routine. As she fastened the buttons, her hand brushed against his chest a brief moment, but enough to make them both freeze. They were standing so close, close enough for her to feel the warm, steady rhythm of his breathing. His woody cologne mingled with the scent of essential oils in the room, creating a tempting mix. Dominic looked down at her, his deep blue eyes glinting with something dangerous. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You're more dangerous than I thought, Ruby." Ruby didn't step back. She stayed right where she was, her hands still on the buttons, her gaze meeting his without a hint of fear. "If I were dangerous," she replied, her voice soft but sharp, "you wouldn't be awake to say that." The air between them seemed to thicken. Dominic smiled a rare smile, not the smug one he wore in boardrooms, but a real smile tinged with surprise and amusement. Ruby, though outwardly calm, felt her heart beat just a little faster. She dropped her hand, stepped back, and gestured at the now neat shirt. "All done," You can leave." But they both knew that moment was anything but done. That brief touch, however accidental, had unlocked something, not affection, not yet, but a primal pull, like two opposite poles that couldn't help but draw closer. Dominic stood up, towering over her, and for a moment he wanted to say something, wanted to keep her there a little longer. But he only nodded, slipped on his suit jacket, and walked out, leaving Ruby with her tangled thoughts. In the days that followed, Dominic kept returning to the spa, each time with a different reason: a massage, an aromatherapy treatment, even a meditation session he clearly had no interest in. Ruby began to get used to his presence, though she still kept her distance. But she couldn't deny that every time he appeared, she caught herself noticing small details. The way he rubbed his temples when he was tired, the way he tilted his head when she said something unexpected, and the way he tried to hide the loneliness in his eyes. Dominic, meanwhile, was increasingly drawn to Ruby, not just because of her singing or the rare sleep she had unwittingly granted him, but because of her honesty, her mystery, and the way she challenged him without even trying. He was beginning to realize he didn't just want her near so he could sleep. He wanted to understand her, to know what made her refuse him, and what made her so different. Ruby wasn't entirely immune either. Though she kept telling herself to be careful, Dominic's mystery, the subtle game of wills between them, and that fleeting moment of contact kept making her wonder, who was he really, beneath the famous CEO title? But she quickly pushed the thought away. No, she told herself, don't let yourself get drawn in. Serenity Spa was still busy in the late afternoon, but inside it retained its signature, quiet calm. Ruby was arranging bottles of essential oils in the corner, trying hard not to think about Dominic West in the tense encounters they'd had lately. She'd promised herself she would keep her distance, but every time he showed up, she felt her boundaries start to blur. Today, she hoped it would be an ordinary day without him, without those deep eyes that unsettled her. But life rarely goes as planned. Ruby's sister, who usually watched over little Luna, called to say she had an unexpected commitment. With no other option, Ruby had to bring 6-year-old Luna to the spa. As Ruby led Luna into the staff lounge, the little girl, with her hair in 2 braids and big round eyes, immediately drew everyone's attention. Luna held her mother's hand, chattering about the neighbor's cat, while Ruby forced a smile, trying to hide her worry. She didn't want Luna to stay here too long, especially when her work required total focus. Dominic, like an unshakable habit, appeared at the spa at that exact moment. He stepped inside, his dark blue shirt hugging his frame, his eyes sweeping the space as if searching for something. When he saw Ruby, he paused, but his gaze was quickly drawn down to the little girl sitting on the bench, her small legs swinging, one shoelace undone. "Who are you?" Luna asked, her voice clear and innocent, showing no hint of shyness. Her eyes studied Dominic with pure curiosity, as if he were just an interesting stranger, not a powerful CEO. Dominic, who wasn't used to children, looked momentarily caught off guard. He was not the sort of man who easily got drawn into childish conversations. But something about Luna, maybe her eyes that looked so much like Ruby's, or her unguarded smile, made it impossible for him to ignore her. "I'm a guest here," he answered in a low voice, trying to maintain a distant air. Luna tilted her head, then pointed down at her pink sneakers. "Do you know how to tie bunny ear knots? Mommy taught me, but I forgot." Ruby, standing nearby, was about to step in to help Luna, but she stopped when she saw Dominic kneel down, something she never would have expected. He, the cold man in the expensive suit, was now bending over in front of a 6-year-old, his hands skillfully looping the laces into neat bunny ears. His expression softened, a gentleness Ruby had never seen before. "Like this, is that okay?" he asked, his deep voice warm. Luna clapped her hands and beamed. "You're better than Mommy. She does it slower." Ruby laughed, but her heart gave a small, involuntary flutter. She stood there watching Dominic not as a distant CEO, not as the man who had made her those audacious offers, but simply as a man willing to kneel down for a little girl he didn't know. That moment made her see him differently. That evening, when Ruby's shift ended, a heavy rain began to pour. Luna had fallen asleep on a chair in the staff lounge, her small head resting on her mother's shoulder. Ruby carried her, struggling to hold an umbrella, but the rain showed no sign of letting up. Dominic, still at the spa longer than he'd planned, watched them from the glass doors. Without hesitation, he stepped outside and opened the door to his sleek black SUV parked by the entrance. "Get in. I'll take you home." Ruby was about to refuse, but when she felt Luna shivering from the cold, she nodded. She carefully settled Luna into the back seat, covering her with her own coat. Dominic drove in silence, only the steady sound of rain tapping against the windows. The warmth inside the car was comforting, but Ruby felt a subtle tension. She glanced at Dominic. His eyes were fixed on the road, but the corner of his mouth curved slightly, as if he were thinking about something that amused him. When they reached Ruby's apartment building, the rain still hadn't stopped. Dominic got out and opened the door for her. Ruby lifted Luna, trying to juggle the umbrella, but Dominic quickly moved to cover both of them. As she reached for her purse, their fingers brushed a fleeting moment, but enough to make Ruby pull back, her heart pounding. She felt the warmth of his fingertips, and when she looked up, his eyes were on her, as though he were trying to hide a smile. "Thank you," Ruby said softly but sincerely. Dominic only nodded, but this time he didn't bother to hide his smile. "Take good care of her. She's special." He turned back to his car, leaving Ruby standing under the awning, watching his taillights fade into the rain. She hugged Luna a little closer, but her mind wasn't only on her daughter. Dominic West, the cold man, was no longer just a stranger. He had stepped into her world, not just with his eyes or his words, but through small actions tying Luna's shoelaces, holding the umbrella over them. And when their fingers had touched, however lightly, it had stirred a closeness they both felt, but hadn't dared to name. On the drive home, Dominic gripped the steering wheel tightly. He wasn't used to this feeling, the strange warmth he felt when he was around Ruby and Luna. It didn't feel like conquest or a deal he wanted to close. It felt like a family, something he had never had, never thought he needed. But now the image of Luna's bright smile and the way Ruby looked at him had burned itself into his mind, making him want to return, to be nearer to them. Back in her small apartment, Ruby laid Luna in bed and pulled the covers up around her. She sat there watching her daughter sleep, but her head was filled with images of Dominic. She told herself to be careful, to keep her distance. But deep down, she knew her heart had already started to waver, and that the cold man was becoming an inseparable part of her thoughts. The little diner was tucked away in an alley, warm golden light spilling out through foggy windows. It wasn't the kind of upscale restaurant with silk tablecloths and expensive wine glasses Dominic usually frequented. Instead, he had chosen a modest place where the smell of freshly baked apple pie mingled with the aroma of coffee and soft country music played in the background. Ruby, sitting across from him, was a little surprised when Dominic suggested coming here. She had expected someone like him to pick somewhere lavish, but the way he looked at her and Luna with genuine sincerity made her agree. Luna sat between them, her big round eyes shining as she stared at the plate of pie in front of her. "Mr. Dominic, have you ever had this pie? It's the best in the world." "Well," she chirped, a bit of whipped cream on her lips. Dominic smiled, a real smile, not the polite kind he wore in meetings. "No, but if you say so, I have to try it." Dinner began with Luna's innocent chatter, but as the little girl became absorbed in her plate, the air between Ruby and Dominic grew more contemplative. In the gentle light, Dominic spoke up unexpectedly, his deep voice careful, like he was opening an old book. "I grew up in a big house, but it was empty. My parents were always busy with work, with parties, with protecting the family's reputation. I was raised by housekeepers and the pressure to become the perfect heir." He paused, his gaze growing distant. "That's when my insomnia started. Every night I'd lie there, thinking about what I had to do not to fail, not to disappoint them." Ruby listened, turning her now cold coffee cup in her hands. She hadn't expected him to share something so personal. There was something in his voice, a loneliness he wasn't trying to hide, that made her want to understand him more. She gave a small, wry smile, her tone lightly teasing to ease the tension. "And yet you know how to tie bunny ear shoelaces for a little girl?" Dominic laughed, a rare, genuine sound. "Actually, I have no idea how to be around kids. But Luna, She's an exception. Ruby took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep water. I used to think I'd have a happy family, like in the movies. But my ex-husband, he wasn't the man I thought he was. In the beginning, he was sweet, but then came the drinking and the hitting. She let out a bitter little laugh, as if she were telling someone else's story. I left when Luna was 3, with nothing but a suitcase full of clothes. But I don't regret it. Luna is why I'm stronger every day. Dominic looked at her, his expression no longer curious or amused. Instead, it was full of respect, tinged with sadness. He wanted to reach out and touch her hand, to say something to ease the invisible scars she carried, but he only tightened his grip on his glass. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met, Ruby, he said, his voice low but sure. Sensing the shift in mood, Luna looked up from her plate. Mommy, Mr. Dominic, why are you talking so serious? Tell a funny story. They both laughed, and in that moment, it felt like they were a little family, even if just for a while. When they left the diner, rain was falling, the droplets sparkling under the streetlights. Luna ran ahead, giggling, while Ruby tried to cover her with the umbrella. Dominic, saying nothing, shrugged off his jacket and held it over Ruby. You shouldn't let yourself get soaked like this, he said, his voice deep, his eyes locked on hers. Then he reached up to gently brush the wet hair off her forehead, his fingertips grazing her skin and leaving behind a soft warmth. It makes you hard to forget. Ruby smiled, a little embarrassed but completely genuine. She didn't reply, but in that moment, her eyes betrayed a flicker of something she couldn't hide. Her heart beat faster, not just because of his gesture, but because of the closeness she felt. A connection deeper than she'd ever thought possible between them. Luna suddenly ran up and threw her arms around Dominic's leg. Mr. Dominic, can you stay and play with me? Before he could answer, she spotted a small stuffed bunny peeking out of his jacket pocket. What's this? Is it for me? She squealed, her eyes shining. Dominic feigned surprise. Oh, maybe I accidentally bought it. If you like it, you can keep it. He winked at Ruby, and she shook her head, trying to hide her smile. But inside, a warmth was blooming. This man, with his cold exterior and lonely past, was slowly becoming an irreplaceable part of her and Luna's world. On the drive home, Dominic kept his hands steady on the wheel, while Luna slept in the back seat, hugging her new stuffed bunny. Ruby sat beside him, staring out the window, but her thoughts weren't on the rain. She was thinking about Dominic, about the way he told his stories, the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel safe without even trying. She knew she was walking into something dangerous, but for the first time, she didn't want to turn back. Dominic, meanwhile, stole glances at Ruby when she wasn't looking. He'd never imagined himself here, in a car with a woman and a little girl, feeling a warmth he'd never known. The secrets they had shared tonight, just small pieces of their lives, had drawn them closer. When they pulled up to Ruby's building, she turned to him, her eyes gentle. Thank you, Dominic, for tonight. He only nodded, but the smile he gave her said everything. As she carried Luna inside, he stood in the rain, watching them disappear behind the door. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just living to exist, but to wait for moments like this. Dominic West's private house was in the suburbs, not the flashy mansion Ruby had imagined, but a 2-story wooden home with big windows overlooking a pine forest. The space was cozy, with a crackling fireplace and the scent of wood mingling with herbs from the kitchen. Dominic had invited Ruby and Luna over for dinner, a casual invitation delivered with a calm demeanor, though his eyes had betrayed a quiet anticipation. Ruby agreed, even as she told herself it was just a friendly evening, nothing more. But the plan changed when Ruby's sister called, offering to take Luna for a sleepover to watch cartoons with her cousins. Luna squealed with joy, hugging the little stuffed bunny Dominic had given her, and ran off with her aunt, leaving Ruby standing in Dominic's doorway, suddenly realizing tonight would be just the two of them. She took a deep breath, trying to chase away the nervous flutter rising in her chest. In the kitchen, soft golden light fell over wooden shelves lined with spices and bottles of wine. Dominic, shedding the stern look of a CEO, wore a gray sweater and jeans, looking more approachable than ever. He stood beside Ruby as they prepared dinner, a simple Italian pasta with homemade tomato sauce. They chatted and laughed, but the air between them carried a subtle tension, as if they both knew they were standing on the edge of something much bigger. As Ruby stirred the pot of sauce, Dominic stepped closer, reaching past her to grab a wineglass from the high shelf. His hand brushed her waist, a light touch, but enough to make Ruby freeze. His warm breath grazed her neck, carrying that familiar woody cologne. The room seemed to shrink until all that remained was the crackle of the fire and the quickening beat of their hearts. Ruby turned slowly to face him. Their faces were only inches apart, their eyes locked, neither saying a word. Time seemed to stop. Dominic leaned in, slowly, as if giving her a chance to pull away. But Ruby didn't. She closed her eyes and their lips met a soft, tentative kiss, like they were both testing an emotion they'd held back too long. The kiss deepened, unhurried but filled with the passion they'd been denying. Dominic's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly over her skin, while his other hand stayed on her waist, drawing her closer. Ruby responded, her palms resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady thump of his heart through his sweater. When they finally pulled apart, their breathing was uneven. Ruby looked at him, her eyes wide and unsure. "I don't know what I just did," she whispered, her voice trembling, as though she was trying to reclaim her composure. Dominic smiled a gentle, steady smile. "But I know I want to do it again," he replied, his deep voice soft, his gaze never leaving hers. They stood there in the warm kitchen, silently acknowledging that this kiss wasn't just a moment of impulse. It was a turning point, confirmation of the pull they'd been fighting since the day they met. Ruby felt her heart pound, not just because of the kiss, but because of the way Dominic looked at her as if she was the only thing he wanted, not to possess, but to cherish. Dominic, in that instant, understood that Ruby wasn't just the woman who helped him sleep or a puzzle to solve. She was the person who made him want to be a better man. Ruby stepped back, her hand brushing her lips as if to hold on to the feeling. "We should have dinner," she said, trying to sound casual, though her shy smile gave her away. Dominic nodded, though his eyes never wavered from her. "Yeah, dinner," he agreed, but they both knew dinner was only an excuse now, an excuse to stay in this moment a little longer. They sat down at the table, candlelight flickering between them, but everything had changed. Every glance, every gesture now carried new meaning. That kiss, gentle and unhurried, had opened a door neither of them could close again. Ruby knew she was stepping onto a path full of risks, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Dominic, watching her through the glow of the candles, felt a peace he had never known, and he knew he would do anything to hold on to it. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. After their first kiss and the night of deep connection in Dominic's wooden house, Ruby and Dominic believed they had found a safe haven amid the world's chaos. That kiss, slow but intense, felt like a promise that they could face anything, as long as they had each other. But they didn't know that an invisible hand, cunning and patient, was already weaving a net ready to tear their fragile peace apart. The next morning, Ruby woke up in her small apartment, pale sunlight filtering through the curtains, falling across the wooden table where she was making coffee. She smiled as she thought of Dominic, his warm, deep voice, his embrace, the way he made her feel loved without having to be strong. But the smile faded when her phone started buzzing nonstop. A friend sent her a link to an article with a panicked message. "Ruby, what is this?" She opened the article, and her heart seemed to stop. A candid photo, her leaving Dominic's house, his jacket draped over her shoulders, the streetlights highlighting her silhouette in the darkness. The lurid headline, "Single Mother Seduces Billionaire CEO to Strike Gold." The piece described her as a calculating schemer, a woman using beauty and tricks to ensnare Dominic West, the most powerful man in the city. The comments were even worse. A spa worker dreaming of becoming a queen. She must really know how to please rich men. Ruby stood frozen, her hands trembling, feeling as if the floor had collapsed beneath her. She didn't know who was behind this, but each line felt like a blade carving into her pride. Serenity Spa, once her refuge, had become the front line of judgmental stares. Her co-workers, who used to chat and laugh with her, now whispered as she walked past. Who knew Ruby was like that, clinging to a big shot? One sneered. She sure knows how to get attention, another added. Loyal clients who once praised her massage techniques now looked her up and down, as if searching for proof of the gossip. Ruby bit her lip and focused on her work, but every murmur felt like a stone pressing on her chest. Worse, the rumors had reached Luna's school. The little girl with her wide eyes and innocent smile came home from her aunt's looking sad. Mom, Luna asked quietly, why did my friends say you're hanging on to Mr. Dominic for his money? What does hanging on mean? Ruby hugged her daughter tightly, her heart breaking. She forced a smile, smoothing Luna's hair. Just some silly words, sweetheart. I love you, and that's what matters most. But when Luna turned away, Ruby sank onto the sofa, covering her face, her tears falling silently. She had fought so hard to give Luna a peaceful life, but now those cruel words were hurting her child. Ruby was exhausted. Each day she felt like a hunted animal, with nowhere left to hide. All she wanted was to retreat, to return to the simple life she had before Dominic came into it, where she and Luna could laugh without being judged. Dominic received word of the article while he was at the Westcorp office, his phone lighting up with notifications from the media team. He skimmed the headline, then the vicious comments, and rage ignited in him like a wildfire. The board summoned him to an emergency meeting, their voices cold. You're dragging this company down, Dominic. This woman is a liability. Quash the scandal, or we will act. Dominic clenched his fists, his gaze so fierce it seemed to burn through the conference room walls. He didn't know who was behind this, but he sensed something larger at play, and he would never let it touch Ruby or Luna. Without hesitation, he drove straight to Serenity Spa, where Ruby was working an evening shift. He found her in the staff lounge, sitting alone, cradling a cup of cold tea, her eyes distant as she stared out the window. Ruby, he said, his voice low but resolute, I know about the article, about everything they're saying. I'm going to handle this. No one is allowed to hurt you. Ruby looked up, her eyes not angry, but exhausted, as if she had carried too much for too long. She stood, facing him, her voice shaky and raw. Dominic, I can't let Luna get hurt anymore. She was teased by her friends, called the child of a gold digger. I'm not strong enough to keep fighting this. I just wanted a peaceful life, but your world, it's tearing everything apart. Dominic stepped closer, taking her hand, feeling her fingers trembling in his. Ruby, he said, voice deep and unwavering, I don't care what they say. I will protect you and Luna, no matter what. The press, the rumors, I'll make them stop. But Ruby shook her head, tears spilling over as her gaze wavered. You don't understand, Dominic. All my life I've prayed for just one thing, peace. I don't belong in your world, with the spotlights and the whispers. I can't let Luna grow up in this ugliness. She pulled her hand free, her voice breaking. I need time. I need to think. For Luna and for myself. Dominic froze, her words landing like a blow to his chest. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to promise he could make it all go away. But her eyes hurt, and resolute stopped him. Ruby, he rasped, I won't force you, but I won't give up. You and Luna are everything I want to protect. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her in the heavy silence, thick with everything they hadn't said. That night, Ruby returned to her apartment, her steps heavy. Luna ran up to hug her, chattering excitedly about a drawing she'd made at her aunt's. Ruby smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She bathed Luna, read her a bedtime story, and when her daughter finally drifted off, she sat by the bed holding her close, staring at Luna's peaceful face. She thought of Dominic, his sincerity, his promises, but she also thought of the headlines, the stares at the spa, and the cruel words that had wounded her little girl. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, soaking into the pillow. I will protect you no matter what, she whispered. Right after leaving Serenity Spa, Dominic called an old friend, now the city's top private investigator. Find out who's behind the article about Ruby, he said, his voice cold as ice. I want every detail: who took the photos, who wrote the story, who paid for it. Leave nothing out. The investigation team worked tirelessly, and within days they handed him a thick folder full of truths he hadn't anticipated. Inside the folder was undeniable proof. Payment records from an anonymous account to the paparazzi who'd snapped the photos, emails coordinating the fake narrative about gold-digging Ruby, and leaked internal Westcorp documents sent to the press to fuel the scandal. All of it pointed to one name: Clara, Dominic's ex-girlfriend, the woman who had been by his side for years. She hadn't just hired people to spread rumors, she had also lobbied certain board members to pressure him, hoping to drive a wedge between him and Ruby. Dominic clenched his fist, fury rising in him like a blaze, but he held it back. He needed to face Clara not with emotion, but with the cold, sharp precision of a CEO. That evening, Dominic invited Clara to his office at Westcorp headquarters. The expansive room, its glass walls overlooking the glittering city, now held only the two of them. Clara walked in, her dress elegant, her confident smile suggesting she still believed she had the upper hand. "Dominic," she began, her voice sweet but calculated, "it's been a while since we met like this. What did you want to discuss?" Dominic didn't reply immediately. He stood, walked over to his desk, and set the thick folder down with a hard thud. "You think I wouldn't find out?" he said, his voice frigid, his eyes boring through her. "Everything, the rumors, the tabloids, the board pressure, you orchestrated it, payment records, emails, leaked documents, it's all here." Clara froze for a second but quickly regained her composure. She let out a dismissive laugh, tilting her head. "Dominic, I just wanted justice. Can't you see she's using you? A spa employee, a single mother. She doesn't belong in your world. I'm only trying to protect you." Dominic stared at her, his gaze glacial, unflinching. "Protect me?" he repeated. "Clara, you've crossed a line. I turned a blind eye out of respect for our past, but you picked the wrong enemy. If you persist, I'll hand all of this over to my attorneys and the press. Defamation, misuse of proprietary information, you'll go to prison, and I'm not bluffing." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Clara's smile disappeared, replaced by a flicker of panic. She opened her mouth to protest, but Dominic's eyes, hard and merciless, shut her up. "Don't test me, Clara," he said, his voice low but deadly calm. "Get out of my life, and leave Ruby alone." Clara turned away without another word, but Dominic knew she wouldn't give up easily. Still, he now had proof, and he wouldn't allow her a second chance. The next morning, the Westcorp board summoned Dominic to an emergency meeting. The conference room, with its leather chairs and cold white lighting, was thick with tension. "Dominic," an older board member began, his voice stern, "your relationship with this woman is damaging the company's image. Our stock is fluctuating. Major clients are asking questions. End it, or we'll be forced to reconsider your position." Dominic sat there, leaning back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over every face around the table. He didn't flinch. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, "if you question my competence, feel free to vote me out. I built Westcorp from a small business into the empire it is today. I don't need anyone reminding me of my responsibilities. But my private life isn't a bargaining chip. Ruby and her daughter are not the problem. The problem is the people trying to sabotage this company from within." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak further. Dominic stood, meeting the chairman's eyes without wavering. "If you want to keep pushing this, be prepared to face the consequences. I have evidence of who's playing dirty behind my back." He walked out, leaving a heavy, wordless quiet in his wake. No one dared challenge him, at least not yet. Outside the boardroom, Dominic pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. He typed a message to Ruby. "I'm not giving up. I'm still here, and you don't have to fight this alone." He sent it but didn't expect an immediate reply. He knew she was hurting, afraid, and he didn't blame her. But he also knew he wouldn't let her face this storm by herself. Meanwhile, Ruby was at her sister's house, sitting beside Luna, who was playing with the stuffed bunny Dominic had given her. The little girl babbled about an animated movie, but Ruby only heard half of it. She unlocked her phone, read Dominic's message, and her heart fluttered. She wanted to trust him, to lean on him, but the headlines, the looks at the spa, and the cruel words that had wounded Luna still haunted her. Clara left Dominic West's office with a strained smile, but inside her, a storm of rage was brewing. His threat, cold and uncompromising, felt like a slap to her pride. He knew she was behind the smear campaign against Ruby, and he was ready to corner her. But Clara was not someone who surrendered easily. If Dominic thought he could scare her into silence, he was wrong. She would find another way. In her luxurious apartment, Clara opened her laptop and pulled up old records from the years she had spent with Dominic. She knew he was secretive, but she also knew Ruby's past, a woman who had survived an abusive marriage. Then she found a name: Ethan, Ruby's ex-husband, a man full of bitterness, jealousy, and willing to do anything to get his way. Clara's smile turned cold. This was the card she needed. That evening, in a dim bar on the outskirts of the city, flickering neon lights washed over Clara's sharp eyes. She sat across from Ethan, a tall man with messy hair and sullen eyes glinting with resentment. In front of him, she slid a stack of tabloids and candid photos of Ruby, with Dominic leaving his house, his jacket draped over her shoulders, their expressions unmistakably intimate. "You know," Clara began, her voice sweet but laced with calculation, "your ex-wife is about to become the stepmother of a billion-dollar empire. Ruby Flores is living the high life with Dominic West." Ethan gripped his beer, his eyes narrowing, his voice dropping to a growl. "She won't get away with this." He glanced through the articles, the screaming headlines about the gold digger and the single mom seducing a billionaire. Old jealousy flared, mixing with a bitter rage that Ruby had moved on to something better than him. Clara leaned closer, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "I need you to do something, Ethan. Come back. Fight for custody of your daughter. Make it as public and ugly as you can. The courts, the press, the public, they'll all turn on her. A mother caught up in scandal, sleeping around with a billionaire? You'll have every reason to win." Ethan's lip curled into a cruel smirk. "And what do you get out of this?" Clara smiled, cold and unblinking. "I want her out of Dominic's life. You do your part, and I'll handle the rest." She pushed a thick envelope across the table, packed with cash and documents. Ethan stared at it for a moment, then nodded. The dark alliance was sealed. That afternoon, Ruby had just picked Luna up from school. The little girl held her mother's hand, chattering excitedly about an art project, but Ruby could only offer a tired smile. The past days had drained every ounce of strength she had: the articles, the stares at Serenity Spa, the whispers that had hurt Luna. All she wanted was to hold her daughter and run far from this world. But as they stepped into the courtyard of their apartment building, a figure appeared, blocking their path. Ethan stood there, tall in his worn-out jacket, a mocking smile twisting his lips. "Hello, Ruby," he drawled, his voice syrupy and false. "Heard you've been living it up. I think it's time our daughter learned what a real family looks like." Luna, clutching her mother's hand, froze, her big eyes going wide. "Mommy, it's Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. She was scared, pressing herself against Ruby's side. Ruby's grip on Luna tightened, her heart racing, memories of those violent years crashing over her like a wave. She pulled Luna behind her, her voice shaking but steady. "Ethan, don't drag her into this. You have no right to be here." He smirked, stepping closer, forcing her to retreat. "Have you forgotten? I'm her father. We could start over, you and me. I love you, you know that." Ruby's eyes filled with hot tears. "Yes, we were a family, and you know exactly why it ended. How dare you come here and say that?" She straightened her shoulders. "Leave before I call the police." His tone dropped to a low, threatening growl. "Ruby, you've really surprised me. Don't you dare stand there and preach to me about morals. You think clinging to that billionaire makes you noble? I'm going to sue for custody of Luna, and the court will see you for what you are, an unfit mother. You really think you can beat me?" Luna began to sob, clinging to Ruby's leg. "Mommy, I don't want to go with Daddy." Ruby bent down, wrapping her arms around her daughter, her voice soft but resolute. "It's okay, baby. You're not going anywhere. Come inside with me." She led Luna into the building and slammed the door shut, but Ethan's threatening stare stayed with her. She locked the door and held Luna tight, trying to hide the terror screaming inside her. In the small apartment, Ruby sank into a chair, covering her face as silent tears fell. The nightmare she thought she had buried had come back worse than ever. She thought of all those years running from Ethan, the nights she held Luna and cried in the dark, and the days she rebuilt their life from nothing. She had believed she was free, but now he was back not just to hurt her, but to take Luna, the most precious thing she had. She looked at Luna, who was playing with the stuffed bunny Dominic had given her face still innocent, but her eyes tinged with sadness. "Mommy, Daddy isn't coming back, right?" Luna asked, her small voice fragile. Ruby forced a smile, brushing her daughter's hair back. "He won't be able to do anything to us, sweetheart, I promise." But inside, she knew that promise had never felt so fragile. Ethan was not the kind of man who gave up, and she had no idea why he had returned now. She wanted to call Dominic, to lean on him, but her fear of losing Luna outweighed everything else. She didn't know if she could trust that he could keep them safe when the whole world seemed to be conspiring against her. The storm in Ruby Flora's life wasn't just the tabloid headlines or the judgmental stares at Serenity Spa. It became a real nightmare when Ethan, her ex-husband, officially filed a lawsuit for custody of Luna. The legal documents, cold and cutting, were delivered to her small apartment, declaring that she was an unfit mother because of the scandals in the press. The tabloids, as if fueled by fresh ammunition, kept dredging up her past: a violent marriage, years of struggling alone, and now the scandalous affair with Dominic West. "Single mother loses right to motherhood," one headline screamed, surrounded by cruel comments that made Ruby feel the whole world had turned its back on her. At the spa, the atmosphere grew more suffocating every day. The manager, with an apologetic look, reminded her that clients were complaining and that her position was hanging by a thread. Ruby kept a calm face, but every whisper and stare felt like another knife slicing into her pride. She thought of Luna, her 6-year-old, staying at her sister's house, and her heart shattered when she remembered her daughter's question. "Mommy, Daddy isn't going to take me away, right?" Ruby had promised to protect Luna, but now she felt she had nothing left to fight with. That evening in her little apartment, Ruby sat among open suitcases. She packed her and Luna's clothes with trembling hands, her mind in turmoil. She had decided to leave the city not because she wanted to run, but because she believed it was the only way to protect Luna from Ethan, from the gossip, and from Dominic's world. She couldn't bear to prolong the nightmare any longer. But every time she looked at the stuffed bunny Dominic had given Luna, her chest ached. She wanted to trust him, to lean on him, but her fear of losing Luna outweighed everything. Rain poured over the city as if it meant to wash all the sorrow away. Dominic West, after a long day battling the board and working with investigators, received word from a spa employee that Ruby had requested several days off. A terrible premonition struck him. He ran from his office, drove through slick streets to her apartment building. When he arrived, he saw the dim light through the window, and his heart clenched. He knocked, but no one answered. He knocked harder, his voice hoarse with worry. "Ruby, I know you're in there. Open the door." Ruby opened the door, her eyes red and exhausted from crying. She stood on the threshold, a suitcase beside her, as if she were ready to disappear. "Dominic," she said, her voice shaking, nearly breaking into a desperate cry. "You don't understand. I can't do this anymore. Ethan, the press, all those people out there. I just want to live peacefully with my daughter." Dominic, soaked to the bone, stepped forward and gripped her shoulders, his eyes blazing, but his voice low and steady. "Ruby, I do understand. More than anyone, I've lost everything before. I've lived in empty rooms, unable to sleep, not knowing what I was even alive for. But you can't fight this alone. Not while I'm here." Tears fell down her cheeks as she choked out, "I'm scared, Dominic. I'm scared Luna will hate me because I couldn't protect her. Ethan, he wants to take her, and I don't know how to stop him." Dominic tightened his hold on her, determination lighting his gaze. "I won't let that happen. Ruby, if you don't have any faith left in yourself, then have faith in me. I will fight for you and Luna, no matter what it costs." His words were a flame, burning away the cold rain and the fear crushing her chest. Ruby looked into his eyes and saw not only conviction, but pain, the pain of a man who had been alone, who had lost too much, and who was now offering everything he had left to protect her. She no longer had the strength to push him away. She fell against his chest, the rain from his clothes soaking into her, but she didn't care. Dominic slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, pulling her close as if to shield her from the whole world. They stood there in the downpour, their hair and shoulders drenched, but neither of them stepped back. Dominic leaned down and kissed her, not a kiss-seeking passion, but a vow that couldn't be broken. His lips were warm and gentle, as if to say he would be here, no matter how many storms came. His voice was rough against her ear. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore. From now on, every step will be with me beside you." Ruby buried her face in his chest, her tears mixing with the rain. For the first time, she let someone else share the weight. For the first time, she felt she didn't have to be strong by herself. The feeling was strange and liberating, as if she had finally found a refuge in the middle of the storm. That night, they stayed together in Ruby's little apartment, the room softly lit by the street lamp glowing through the curtains. They didn't speak much, letting their presence say what words couldn't. Dominic sat beside her on the sofa, his hand clasped around hers, a promise without any need for declarations. For the first time in days, Ruby felt her heart lighten. She rested her head on his shoulder, his steady, warm breathing like a lullaby she used to sing to Luna. In the quiet, Ruby whispered, "I haven't told you about Ethan. He's trying to sue for custody of Luna. I don't know how to stop him." Dominic's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "You don't have to face this alone anymore. I'll hire the best attorneys. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he can never touch Luna. I promise." They held each other, not with physical desire, but with the bare honesty of two souls laid completely open. Every touch, his hand on her shoulder, his breath against her hair, was a declaration that she was no longer alone. Ruby looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she believed she could lean on someone, that she didn't always have to be the strong one. As they lay there in the small room with the rain still drumming on the window, Ruby asked, her voice soft but steady, "What are we going to do, Dominic? Ethan, the rumors, all of it is still out there." "Together," he said, threading his fingers through hers, "we'll face it all, one step at a time. You, me, and Luna." Ruby nodded, feeling a true spark of hope for the first time. She fell asleep in Dominic's arms, no longer haunted by nightmares of Ethan or the world's judgment. Though the storm still raged outside, his promise, the vow made in the rain, made her believe they could survive it. Dominic watched her sleep, knowing he had finally found his reason to live, and that he would do anything to protect this little family. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. Dominic West decided to put an end to the storm. Though the rumors about him and Ruby had finally begun to quiet, the custody battle between Ruby and Ethan had become the hottest topic in the media headlines, like Dominic's lover losing custody, and Ruby, the mother who chose romance over responsibility, dominated every newsstand. But Dominic didn't just want to protect Ruby and Luna. He wanted the world to know they were his family, and no one had the right to hurt them. That morning, Dominic held a press conference at Westcorp headquarters, standing before hundreds of reporters without letting the PR team intervene. He wanted to speak from his heart, not from any carefully prepared statement. The conference room blazed with camera flashes and the relentless clicking of shutters. But Dominic stood there in a simple dark blue shirt, his gaze steady and full of feeling. "Ruby Flores is not a gold digger," he began, his deep voice ringing out over the whispers. "She is the mother of an incredible little girl, Luna, and she is the woman I love. Ethan Flores, if you want someone to attack, attack me. I will not allow anyone to harm them, whether by words or by actions." He paused, looking straight into the cameras, as if speaking directly to Clara, the board, and anyone else plotting against Ruby. "Stop this or be ready to face the consequences." His declaration was like a wave, silencing the board, making Clara tremble in her apartment, and leaving the press stunned by the determination of a CEO usually known for his cold demeanor. Some reporters began to write about his sincerity, about a man willing to risk his reputation to protect his family. For the first time, public opinion began to shift in Ruby's favor. But she still couldn't breathe easy. Ethan and his lawsuit remained a shadow hanging over her. Dominic didn't just talk. Right after the press conference, he assembled the best legal team in the city attorneys who had handled billion-dollar cases. They dug into Ethan's past, gathering every shred of evidence of his abusive behavior during their marriage. Old police reports, witness statements from neighbors, even the threatening messages Ethan had sent Ruby, all of it was laid out in the preliminary hearing. Ruby sat in the back row, her hands trembling as she clutched her sister's. She hadn't wanted Luna to see any of this, but she knew she had to face it if she wanted to protect her daughter. In the courtroom, Ethan tried to keep a confident facade, but when Dominic's lawyers presented the evidence, photos of old bruises on Ruby's arms, records of the times Ethan abandoned Luna, he began to unravel. The judge, stern and unyielding, ruled to strip Ethan of any claim to custody. A father with a documented history of violence cannot be considered fit to raise a child. Ethan left the courthouse, his eyes filled with hate, but he no longer had any power to threaten Ruby. When Clara heard about Ethan's defeat, she knew she had lost her own game. Terrified of Dominic's power and the evidence he held against her defamation campaign, Clara sent Ruby a letter of apology. "I was wrong to interfere in your life," the letter read, stiff but resigned. "I will withdraw from Westcorp and will not come near you again." Ruby read the letter, her hands shaking, but she felt no triumph, only exhaustion, as if every ounce of strength had been drained from her in the past weeks. When everything finally settled, Ruby returned to her small apartment. Luna was on the floor building a puzzle. The little girl looked up, her smile bright. "Mommy, Mr. Dominic said he's coming over to play," Luna chirped, holding up a puzzle piece shaped like a little house. Ruby smiled, but inside her, there was still an emptiness she didn't know how to fill. She knew Ethan had been pushed away, Clara had retreated, but the scars of public scorn, of old wounds, still remained. She wondered if she would ever be able to move on, if she deserved Dominic's love at all. A soft, steady knock came at the door. Ruby opened it, and there was Dominic, standing in his gray overcoat, his hair tousled by the wind. He didn't bring a ring, didn't kneel, didn't come with camera flashes or grand proposals. He simply stood there, his gaze gentle but strong, like a man who had fought through every storm to reach her. "Ruby," he said, his deep voice calm, "I won't promise you the whole world, but I promise you and Luna a home, a place where you don't have to be afraid, where you don't have to be strong all the time." Tears slid down Ruby's cheeks. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to run. "Dominic," she whispered, "I don't know what I have to give you. All I have is Luna, and a heart that's tired." "That's all I've ever needed," he said, pulling her into a gentle embrace. Luna ran up and threw her arms around both of them, giggling. "Mr. Dominic, will you play puzzles with me?" Dominic crouched down to ruffle her hair, his eyes shining with a quiet joy he had never known before. That night, they sat together on the rug, helping Luna build her puzzle. The little apartment was filled with laughter, the sound of Luna's squeal when she finished the tiny house, Ruby's laughter when Dominic clumsily dropped a puzzle piece, and his own when Luna teased, "You're a silly grown-up." There were no camera flashes, no headlines, no boardroom pressure, just three people sharing a moment of peace Ruby had once thought impossible. When Luna finally fell asleep, Ruby and Dominic sat on the sofa, the soft glow of the table lamp wrapping them in a gentle hush that felt like a shelter from the world. "I used to think I wasn't worthy," Ruby whispered, her eyes downcast on their intertwined hands. "After everything, Ethan, the press, Clara, I thought I could never bring happiness to anyone." Dominic took her hands in his gaze unwavering. "Ruby, you've given me happiness even if you don't see it. You and Luna are my family, and I will do everything it takes to keep this family safe." His words were a flame that chased away the last of the cold in her chest. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. Dominic kissed her forehead, then found her lips, slow and full of meaning. The kiss was more than touch, it was a promise, a merging of two souls that had found each other in the storm. He drew her closer, his hand skimming her back, in a tender reassurance of safety and love that needed no spectacle. In the quiet glow, they let themselves sink into each other unhurried, but full of a passion born of everything they had survived. His shirt slipped to the floor, and Ruby felt the warmth of his skin against hers, erasing the memories of all the nights she had shivered alone. She reached for him, her hand trembling as it rested over his heartbeat. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you're where I want to stay." They came together not just in desire, but in the raw honesty of two hearts no longer afraid to be seen. Every kiss, every caress was a vow that neither would ever face the world alone again. When they lay there afterward, breaths mingling, Ruby felt a peace she thought she'd lost forever. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. No visions of Ethan, no headlines, no fear. Just a deep, unbroken sleep in the arms of the man who had chosen her, and the echo of Luna's laughter from earlier in the night. Dominic watched her sleep, her face soft and calm as if she had never known life's storms. He knew the trials weren't over, public opinion could turn again, the board could still try to interfere, but he no longer feared any of it. He had finally found his purpose, and it was this small family. He kissed Ruby's forehead and whispered, "Sleep well, Ruby. From now on, I'll always be here." The storm had passed, and in that little apartment, a new family had been born. Ruby, Dominic, and Luna, they didn't promise a perfect future, but they had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next.